First of all, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the Anthology organizer to invite me here, and also to see so many young designers here in the evening joining this session. Particularly to my excitement, I have the opportunity to meet many of my friends actually coming from everywhere in the world, sitting there, Aaron and Dean, Guggenheimer, and everybody. This has been a difficult challenge for me, as some of you know that I have been a dean at the School of Architecture at University of Southern California. And the job of a dean is really pushing the school's agenda and recruits for the students and fundraising for the causes of a better school. So I haven't really put myself into a serious thoughts on my own work, particularly this past year marked the end of my tenure. So I am also in transition from academic position to a practicing architect. So for that, I also appreciate this opportunity to this is actually the first public talk after my deanship. So my talk today has something to do with my readiness to embrace a practice that somehow resides between the city and the countryside. This has been a topic both in China, where my practices is primarily based on, but also a discussion of a new economy, now not only in China, but around the world. So I use this title, Do City and Be Countryside. I'm going to read a little essay here, and just to kind of flush out what I've been thinking. So do city and be country. In the context of my practice, city and country are one that holds humanity, one that engenders economy, and one that needs design. Do in this expression means an action equipped with social apparatus and reactive strategy to external forces. The results are oftentimes artificial and consequential to a set of dynamic systems which consistently manipulate design outcomes with or without premeditated processes. On the other hand, be in this phrase means a personal position charged with internal desire and self-references. The aspiration of be is to discover, give birth to objects, including architecture, which are oftentimes accidents and in the landscape, and with unexpected rationale, which actually break through and violates many of the traditional dimensions in where the practice is. So in the city, a designer is a civil or infra, in my lack of language in English, is infra neighbor or even a hidden neighbor, which always find excuses to screw up things and hide its mistakes and move on to another cases. But in country, you are a landmarker. Once you do things, you can't escape anymore. You have to stay and deal with the consequences. So I'm straddled in between this kind of infra hidden neighbor of a city and a apparent loud landmarker of a countryside context. So in the city, this phrase comes up as the end of my essay. One kind of screwed up and move. In countryside, you have to make it up and stay. So this is a city. This is my home city, actually, Xi'an. As beautiful as it has been, is really kind of screwed up. If you look at this close up, you really don't know where it is. As a matter of fact, it can be anywhere and equally bad. So this is a photo I take this morning. As beautiful as it is, if you zoom in, it's my lovely whole city. It's also kind of screwed up. If you look at the skyline, you don't know which building is what, and you don't know where it is. So this is what we did or have been doing to the city. Screwed up and move on to another project. So this is, are you guys on WeChat? So if you are on it during the season, there's a lot of good articles coming up during the Chinese holidays. This is, the Chinese character here really means work hard, right? This is how we work hard on cities. We basically don't know what we're digging to, and we actually are destroying what we're standing on. So in a way, the harder you work, the more dangerous you get into. So this is do. This is do. This character really means do. Do city. Do. This is a recent kind of trend to a countryside where you actually start to show a little bit more sensitive passion towards each other. Even an ideal of a affair with actually a passion to other beings, for example, dogs and beautiful kind of landscape. So this is coming up in the countryside. I don't know what it means, but it kind of entertains me to see there's actually a sensitive, not too hard, but actually to come down to a setting of environment and be passionate to each other. This season also sees this kind of a flood of farmers returning home. And also urbanites that rushing out to villages. So I use these two images to simply say this process, bilateral movement in such intensity have been screwing our cities, but it may screw up our countryside. So this is a warning sign that faces us. So with this, I'm going to share my practice in last couple years, sort of between the city and the countryside. First, this is a project in Shenzhen, a large urban site without specific programs. So the responses, this is actually many years ago, the responses is treat this as one building and develop a pixelated strategy that it engenders or given kind of form to different functions and possibilities, and also the kind of urban life. So, and the programs are assigned to this building blocks in a very random way. That means it can be assigned to any parts of this otherwise monolithic form. And this is kind of a rendering during the night, and this is the city that kind of extruded from the site plan. This is also a model for how the city can be seen as one stroke of an idea and embraces many spaces and programs. And this is another project that is a university city, the city that will embrace 10 universities coming together to this land. So they share green bands, otherwise they have divisions of their internal programs, but they kind of go across the length of the plan in a way separate the functions through each of the colleges, but also forming a two-directional ordering system. So this is then the kind of 10 universities, but put into one map. So all the color-coded bars are for either classrooms, residences, and labs and other functions. In a way, it is treated as one building, and this is part of that campus. And this is actually one of the college that's been built. This is a library, and the beige, white bars are generic classrooms. This kind of campus project are government development. The budget is very limited. The only place that you could develop some architectural languages are the public points, which are the libraries or sports stadiums or all the other public functions. All the dormitory and classrooms are generic, low budget, very fast development. So this kind of an informal strategy where you want to treat the classroom as one building throughout the, look at those long bars, they're basically one section diagram and extrude into infinite length and folded into different spaces. Where the dots, the round dots are the sports stadium and the red are the libraries. And then the other parts at the right-hand side are the dormitories. This is under construction. As you can see, the materials and the forms are very simple. In other words, this whole building takes only probably 8 construction documents. In other words, plans and sections, all the same detail. So in a way, by accident, they go against gravity logics of materiality. So they basically one detail throughout. And once in a while, we get to do a large building that's not part of a city, but as big as an urban block, but one building. This is done for a developer in Beijing, Soho, China, very, very renowned developer, have committed many good architects, including Zaha Hadid and all the other. So we were actually the very early teams that engaged with the development project. This is Soho, one of the mini Soho. So this is actually, this is supposed to be 3 buildings, but we actually connected them to one building. And each of the solid vertical volume is 1/3 of a typical Northern American skyscraper typical floor plan. And the glass links are actually where the core is. So the core is bright, and then the space is actually enclosed in the shell, vertical shell. In other words, each of the vertical bar is only 500 square meter. If you divide it into half, which is 250 square meter, it's just about the right size of a small startup or advertisement company or creative company. So each of the company, as small it is actually have a front door, have a reception, have their own logo at the entry, which is totally different from the large 2,000 square meter minimum skyscraper where you pay a lot of rent, but you come out of the core. You walk around the dark corridor looking for your partners or collaborators, which is the kind of a problem for small companies. So because of this critical take a look on the typical floor plan, this building was sold so fast. So this area is also for you who are not familiar with Beijing. This is where the former U.S. embassy is. Many small, strong companies were created around this area. So this building set the record for Soho, Zhangxin, and Panxi in terms of how fast the whole project sold out. So that is to see that even a given architectural formula in a very given mature urban site can be re-examined, and the business for the developer can be also added value through architectural or design creativity. So this is obviously the only regret for this project is that we originally thought vertical volumes are basically bearing walls without any columns. So the whole floor is 450 square meter floor to floor was the load-bearing wall. But that imposed huge difficulty for construction technology because concrete, pre-stressed, and all those kind of very beautiful technology are on its way out to all the kind of composite and steel fast-track construction. So this is actually a clad, not a real concrete shell. So that actually, so what we were talking about is to make the building envelope as a shell, to make the cores as sandwiched soft volume. But this was not achieved through the process. So this is how the first couple levels are all commercial, public, interactive space. So the bubbles, the size of the bubbles that indicate the intensity of the commerciality on the lower part of the building. So this brings us to a very important competition in Shenzhen. Many years ago, this was a very hilly site with many illegal constructions in the valley. So this competition calls for the Southern New University of China. So we proposed 3 towers, really occupied the minimum footprint of the site, and develop all university programs into these 3 towers with humanity, technology, and I think administrative or laboratories. So this is basically each of the volume plays a role of the artificial hill, and all the separations between units in the university are sectional devised as such. So this is kind of one of the quick rendering to show how these 3 months actually play against each other, sets in the valleys of this beautiful Shenzhen site. For those of you who visited Shenzhen 20 years ago is a very rich landscape with many hills, but after 20 years, all of the hills are shaved in flat land, and new development or just kind of like a flying carpet and basically falling on the city. So this project is actually calling for a strategy which really keep the mountains and actually intensify this sense of landscape. Just like weather here, everything grows in Shenzhen. So our idea that this was about 10 years ago, actually, the competition. So the whole building has very extended balcony, have vegetations all the way 5 meters into the edge. So all the glazing are under the shade, and all the vegetations mark the parameter. Oops. And models. And so all this urban plan, architectural, mega architectural idea has slowly kind of developed into a response to what is called new countryside strategy. So this is outside Shanghai in Qingpu, around a big lake, and on the very kind of the lower part of the lake, that's the historical town, and then the green marked area are the new developments. And so our idea is to create a dialogue between this new development and historical site, while also develop a strategy to revitalize, but also re-inject new programs into the old town. The red marked band is actually the old city wall. So like what we have here, the wall were all demolished, but we actually find the map and mark the walls on the ground and develop all the programs that actually interact with the red band into a tourism band, while the inside the red footprint of the wall develop into different phases of commercial and tourism project. This project, so this is the first part of that development. We were the sort of a planner and strategist for the commercial strategy. We invited 非常建筑, Yung Ho and 5 architects develop each of this blocks into this area. So this actually was successfully developed, and the building, this first area is already done. So this is kind of a shot from across the lake, and as you can see, the buildings are without exception something to do with the tradition, but also new material and construction details. So this is the shops, and with the wood sandwiched by the white wall. And this is another kind of a mega urban project next to the Nanjing high-speed rail. This is for another very ambitious developer. We actually have won the project, but the developer sort of felt this is, they paid us too much because we didn't do any curves. And this is all one-story building packed up into a step with stacking mountain in Chinese literature and intellectual painting terms, stacking mountains. So eventually the developer had Ma Yansong develop a curvilinear balloon wrapping this stacking mountain. So we're now doing half of it. MAD is doing the other half. So we're doing the kind of stacking mountain. MAD is doing the kind of plastic wrapping mountain like that. And we'll see. So this is part of that design process. So now, so last 2 projects indicated our team has now put a lot of attention into countryside development. This is where Jade Valley is. A very quick introduction of that. That's my home village. My father was born in this area. 20 years ago, I started to discover the new possibility of growing grapes and also made wine. After 20 years, now we have a very strong foothold and start to develop different projects related to agri-tourism, slow food, and all the countryside revival projects. In this project, we have changed our role from a pure designer offering design services to a process that you have no influence, or developers who are totally impenetrable sometimes, most of the times. In this process, we are actually a developer as well, not a full developer, but we are a strong element in the process in terms of bringing the government programs and the private capital and banks together through this process as sort of a key player in this agricultural industry. So there are many components in this project. I'm going to go through very quickly what we're now. So this is the landscape, right? So you have this mountain, and then you have this gentle rolling hills that this kind of landscape immediately tells you there's like a very ancient cultural tradition, but there's also very vibrant agricultural communities that survives on the rolling gentle hills. So this actually was 2 weeks ago, just taken from the site. So as you see, all the land that are now having terraces are already developed into vineyards. And the buildings you see are cases that we've already started to build and also physically reform the landscape. So this is already the vineyards that's been put in place. So we in this whole area, we're testing the idea to develop a very bonded, unexpandable cluster of buildings, just like what we have. You have a wall, very clear marked area where you have cultural facilities, theaters, museums, and then you have marketplace, where it forms a strong contrast to the other buildings like our painted beige, which are the farmers' houses that otherwise expand with no limit. So what we wanted to do is to create a very identifiable new forms that indicating new set of economy in different ways to engage local agriculture. And so this is another sort of resort wine experience and cellars on the hill. Portion of it is already built in the kind of scene with snow. And then obviously we also start to do small structures for the villages that has lost its tradition of both civic kind of space, marketplace, and even religious place. So this new buildings would insert a public space where actually they could form its own market, farmers market, for example, but also local theater or other means of public activity. So this kind of project, we're very tiny, but we basically do it as a donation, but also help the overall ecology throughout the area. And then this would be very ambitious new construction to basically rebuild the town locally that's already kind of compromised or even destroyed. And these are some buildings that we've already started to build on our own. This is the kind of a winery, small hotel, and other public commercial programs. And this is also a few days ago. All the materials are locally obtained and the labors are locally available, but then the geometry and the way the materials are put together are not local. What I have talked in the panel this afternoon is you have to violate the tradition within. In other words, you be part of the tradition by violate those which are not contributing to new possibilities, both in terms of function and architectural language, and even ability to bring different people into otherwise a very local community. And so this, for example, this is a close-up view. The roof is a curve, and the ground is a straight line, but they're all kind of approximated through the surfaces by pixelated bricks. And this photo particularly interesting because all the upper surfaces are all snow covered, so actually you see almost a dashed line marking that transformation of form. This is inside. Obviously the lining, what I call, are all traditional building materials forming kind of a totally Western lifestyle, but with absolute local material and texture. We're building this type of remodeling of the local homes. This building just finished on the lower right corner, which is actually a gate to the overall vineyards area. And obviously, part of this campaign is to bring, as I said, different people with different life, different appreciation, mingled with the local culture. This is how I see every building that's happening in this area should play. Not only bringing sort of a landmark in terms of physical manifestation, but also bring a new integration of different lives. This eventually has a lot to do with how the economy being transformed. So we have geodesic domes for endless parties, right? Any time. And then we have tents for champagne reception. Then we have hotel rooms under the roof for people who have a little too much to enjoy. And always the space has to engage art that's not convenient locally, for example, all the other art forms that can be easily grabbed from the local. But those are museum pieces. But this is really live, ongoing art experiment of young artists. And then besides all this permanent structure, we design in this whole project plays as a catalyst, or what I say, a firecrackers, to kind of provoke the local attention, but also external expectation. So this would be wood structures that built every year in the summer, and they have no function except they frame views and probably could accommodate you for a 2-hour nap. So we call these things nap pavilion. So you can come here and take a nap with the breeze through. So they're all prefab and craned, trucked in the side and put in place. And they really sort of bring a new spirit to the landscape. And this landscape has been here for millions of years. So this valley, very valley, is where the Lantian apes, the Homo sapiens, that's discovered. That's 1.35 million years ago. But for the last 1.35 years, a million years, there's no winery, there's no real interesting stuff going on. So I think, so this little intervention of architectural project actually brings a really new vantage, a new kind of excitement on the site. So much so that I thought it was a nap pavilion, but people come here for yoga. I don't know what is it, this ballet or whatever. So immediately become a selfie spot. So people coming there and take photos with the landscape. So this is, we're constantly doing this. Another piece of the similar approach with prefabbed cage in pieces that are put on top of the abandoned electrical pole. For those who have gone through fast transforming communities, you know the electrical poles are constantly, the electric wires are constantly changing their routes, and the poles are, so in China, in many places, in Beijing even, outside the 4th ring road, you see electrical poles randomly mark the landscape. They must have reasons, but the reason quickly lost, so they left the mark of with the electrical poles. We have so many of them in the countryside, so I took all of them and trying to build stuff like this. So this was actually in our parking lot. So this is also a nap pavilion, but you have to climb up. So there's ladders. And quickly students come in and do all weird things with it. And tourists come and do things. Anyway, so all I want to say is even architect students here, you could engage in things like this and bringing the meaning to design. A robotic construction logic pizza oven. So every piece of brick is not only rotates on plan, but also three-dimensional up. So they change both the coursing and the profile. Very difficult to build. And we were going to have robotic interaction, but finally I find that my local farmers are better and cheaper than robots. So we actually have them, and we mark each of the brick, and they actually did this on their own. If you notice carefully on the ground, so actually the swirling pattern of the brick started from ground and moves up. And so then we have this, this is probably the tallest pizza oven you've ever seen. This is like 5 meters tall. Because the section, the cone portion and the dome portion has such a space filled with sand. So after 45 minutes fire, the temperature of this oven is over 750 degrees, which is the best temperature for quick pizza. 2 minutes, right, out. So we actually now cook the best pizza in the city. And it's famous, people come here for that. And so this is a famous TV host and with a chef and doing its own pizza. And Italian friends coming here to do this own pizza. And this is actually a Bulgari chef team coming here to do their own pizza. all you can feel is I'm still in debate on my practice. Am I going to continuously screw up cities and making projects that are that I can hide behind and excuse other people who felt this is not my decision, it's a bad project, but it's not mine. Or I stick to the countryside and every mistake is on me and I have to stay with it and constantly improve and make it up for the next project. With that, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Qingyun.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to open the floor for some questions. So I want to open the floor to Sir Toby for the moderation or the moderating.
Thank you for that great introduction to your perspectives and points of view. Maybe because I'm sitting next to Dean Aaron, I was reminded from the beginning point of your conversation about do city be country, about the tension, say, between Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City and his student, which became nemesis, Paolo Soleri. They really had a very different understanding of what is a city, what is the country, how can we actually embrace the realities of both, what is our responsibility to protecting one and the other. I think in the case of Frank Lloyd Wright, there was a kind of a diminution or a kind of a granulization of the city. The city was everywhere, nowhere, kind of in the Gertrude Stein-esque way, maybe, although he may disagree with that characterization. In the case of Paolo Soleri, there was a kind of a tremendous, overwrought, maybe respect for the landscape and the environment, and there was a kind of an ingathering. So I was thinking of all of that in the context also of my experience in New York City, where I stayed for many, many years, where the city is such a burning, throbbing hub of activity, changing relatively slowly. One of the reasons being is that actually the population in New York, despite its purported sophistication, are very conservative. They don't like to see change. And so I was wondering, where, if at all, you're thinking about that idea, do city be country, falls, particularly in the context of your responsibility to build the city and build the country.
I think I'm going to put this kind of two-end in a space where my practice sort of is addressing or has been addressing. To me, as I said, they're the same actually. City and countryside, they're the same coin with two sides. I think where you can learn from the work in the countryside give you a sense of essential skill and also a very exact insight to how habitat is being formed. But that then when you kind of apply that to your urban project, you're sort of react to urban problem from really inside yourself. That's one. And then I think the city, on the city side, China, I have to put China in this kind of conversation. I don't think the kind of society or the political process really understand what city is about. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity that we can influence the sort of the city making by bringing those essential aspects in it. Because in the process of the city making, there's this planning thing and there's this whole official process to decide how city is being made. But the essential sort of dimension and ability to create spaces that urban or rural, but all engaging in this kind of humanity or even commerciality is consistently forgotten or discounted in China's current urban process. So in this kind of reciprocal practice, I felt we can have a little bit more convincing proposition, even to the city project. Also, in the last point, I believe between Frank Lloyd Wright's urban and rural proposition, I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright was addressing agriculture or rural agenda. He's highly aware of it. I think that's where he actually cultivates his positions to all. And to him, it's this kind of organic integration of both. But being in the city, and you have to be working under a set of, as I said, external forces that and distract you from those pursuit of those essential dimensions. And China is different. I think American countryside is different from Chinese countryside. Chinese countryside are actually very populated, extremely sophisticated, and they exist longer than the wisdoms or the intelligence of making cities. That's why the cities has been really hurt by this stubbornness of what the countryside is. As I said, the people that in the slides, in the Spring Festival or in all the holidays, rush back home. They never want to be in the city, and they don't even use the city. They just work in the city and then move back. And this happens many times a year. So, in that, I'm still trying to find out what is the city in China. I don't think it has the answer. Shenzhen is as big as it is a large farm. Beijing is a large family. Beijing is Forbidden City, and the rest is still kind of Forbidden City and extended families. So I'm just going to stop there.
I might disagree a little bit with your initial representation of Manila as being a place that has no center. Manila is unique in the sense that we are not one city, we're 17 separate municipalities. I find it very interesting that each municipality has a vertical core and then it's surrounded by a low-lying area. So you can actually identify which city is where, and I don't want to over-romanticize certainly the impact of that. But, from my perspective, there are possibilities for anchoring separate identities for each city, and I think it's a little bit different when you're working in the context of a central political organization. And I'm not sure that, maybe politics is something we need to address today, but, it's my understanding also that China has this great urbanization project. Right. And so whatever trends that you are working within I'm assuming are going to accelerate over time, and whatever mistakes are being made will increase in severity, whatever amelioration will occur, whatever more positive developments will similarly try to counteract that. But jumping back to the country, one of the things I was struck by was the limitation that you put upon yourself when developing structures in the country. So you built a wall around them, and to me that's a very poignant gesture. So of protection, that it may be a kind of an urban cell that migrated to the country, but you still wanted to limit its impact and to protect the countryside, and I'm assuming the traditions, both agricultural, topographical, and so on.
Yes, that was deliberate. I understand even the Chinese local politicians, and I actually proposed many of these sort of modules and in the rural area. And obviously, immediately, it's not Chinese. Many of you, or in Chinese eyes, they're not Chinese. They're like Western kind of forts or polys. But that's because very early urban forms that sort of given birth in the rural areas is like that. It may not be the same, but it's really like that. And there are reasons for that. And part of that is that you create an activity that is, on one hand, protective to what's inside the wall, which has lost its meaning today, but distinguished itself from the activities outside the wall. You create kind of a two value polars to enhance each other. For example, if it's a marketplace, then you have to kind of generate this threshold where you entering another set of rents or wealth or openness, which is inside the wall, and then outside the wall there are villages and fields, and that kind of threshold or boundary is not separating, hopefully, but it's actually given enhance each other. That's one kind of sort of in this urban morphological discussion. But locally in China is a reaction to what's going on now. If some of you travel through China, what's really, we talk about urban sprawling and all that. That's not a problem in China. In China is the village sprawling. Have you heard of that? The village sprawls faster than the city, and they sprawled with a very low FAR. In other words, they sprawled at two-story buildings, and nobody wants to be next to each other. This kind of civic shared space of early township is lost. I mean, I lived in this valley I've been working in this valley for 20 years, and those villages were destroyed in front of my eyes every year. So this really is kind of a critique or response to what's happening locally. No developer would do this. That's why we have to do it. And I'm confident if we get the bank into it, we will make it good, and then they will start to do it. And so those are I think your observation is really a good one. So it was deliberate to render it as something that completely off the time. It's in the old world in a way.
Maybe I'm going to transition just a little bit to our reality here in Manila with respect to the idea of a wall. I think in your case, the wall is meant to protect both sides, the inhabitants inside, the countryside outside, to ensure that there's no leakage, that there's no unintended consequences. And, whereas here, really, the walls are a kind of a historic manifestation of separation, of rich and poor, powerful and weak, and so on. And I think being here in Intramuros, which is one of those, the original manifestation of that idea, Intramuros was a place where only the elite, the Spanish elite largely, were allowed to live, and everyone else lived outside the wall. And we see that throughout our city here. We have privileged communities with walls around them, and unprivileged communities living outside. So I find it interesting also that simple construction like the wall can be imbued with so many meanings, and of course are always subject to understanding via the prism of the particular culture. Maybe there are some questions in the audience also that we should entertain with respect to the work that we have seen and the discussion that has been developed. Me, louder. All right. Do we have microphones out there in the audience? We have quite a number of students here tonight, and because I am an educator, among other things, my job is to make life very uncomfortable for the students. Can you give the microphone to that young man at the end here with the striped shirt? Yeah. We're just going to force him to give us a question.
Yes, good.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Paolo Covin from Pavilion University, and I would just want to ask a simple question: how is the living in China very far different from here in Manila? A bit about from your projects in in urban cities and in your country.
Well, I have to say that this is my first time in Manila. I was saying that my comments or notes on the skyline of Manila needs to be deepened, and yes, I lack any deep experience in the city, but I can see their general problems of cities around the world, particularly in Asia, and for one, it's just the all buildings in China and here, it's urban building that has such a important role, both in terms of ground space and the skyline. And I can imagine as the size, the kind of a huge size of it, it bears so much importance to the city. But most of them, if not all, are so randomly thought out and very badly crafted, and also badly invested. I don't know who are the developers. And such a big building is going to be here for many years. Why not make it really remarkable? That I don't understand. I think that is the same no matter where. I mean, somehow it's all went to the same wrong. But in China, I have to say, the space are used differently. Chinese people in this own density, and it's weird sort of this individual kind of preference on things, consume cities like nowhere else. They really use the city. I mean, really used it. But here I see densities, but I see there's kind of inherent for today, sort of the sense of public space and civic kind of not rules, but civic disciplines of how public space is used. For example, this will never happen in China. I don't know. Maybe it's always going to be in the formal kind of auditorium and with the official seat. So in that, I felt that's what I sensed the difference mostly. And so I, also the language here today I experience very clearly. There's no barrier of communicating between different people with kind of the immediacy of responses and propositions. So that to me is also different from China. But China, the challenges are how taking architecture, how architectural discipline can be considered influence on its, not only on its urbanization, but on its economy. And that, I think, somehow has become less compared to a few years ago. So I felt me returning China last year, wanted to kind of put my own voice and bringing architecture into the discussion.
If you can just expand that also to talk a little bit about architecture as a political process in China, and also given your experience in the West, how the process of development and the influence of an architect varies between those two cultural points of view.
Right. Well, China is a very political society. Politics in China is part of economy, part of culture. So it's not really, it can't really be isolated. So that's the term really, sometime in the Western terminology, is not totally coincide with. So politics in China is economy, is social, what is the word?
Sociological phenomenon.
And so we put it together as a political kind of umbrella only because the society is organized in that way. Architecture has two sides in this process, I mean, from my own work. One is the actual physical sort of influence, right? Because it's directly related to the kind of ambition and desire of this kind of developing society. On the other side, architecture is an intellectual process, and it has to be part of that. So I find the discussion of architecture in light of urbanism has been really part of the process. But the physical side of it, making buildings, hasn't been, it's slower, let me put it that way, in the kind of intellectual process. So, for example, many mayors are trained as architect, and there are different architectural boards and planning boards. They're all trained as architects because architects are able, or more able in Chinese society, talk about how economy and cities are parallel in terms of its capacity to each other. Architects are able to talk about how cities can develop or give birth to new industries that kind of engender economy that's otherwise not part of the tradition. So I think all this process, you always find architects in it.
So you're suggesting that architects in China are relatively close to the centers of power, the ones that are helping to develop programs
Yes.
and plans and objectives.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I would think that's actually a little bit different from the environment that we find here and also in the West, in the United States especially, where the political process doesn't include significant input from the architectural community until somewhat late in the process.
Yes, I agree.
Are there any other questions tonight?
My name is Erica Barrera.
Hi.
As I'm watching all these talks and listening to you guys, half of me is very hopeful, but the other half is more frustrated with how it's going to be executed here. Because I see so many cities in my country, and there's not much planning. It's like people just sprout buildings on their own without any. I look at South Korea, for example. The landscape is very clean. There's some thought into it. But I look at, like, if you stand on any road in the Philippines, it's like, oh my God, it's like it's very scattered.
You're Filipino.
Yes.
So what do you think is the difference? Why do you think that there seems to be somewhat less planning, more chaos in the process of development than, say, what we've heard tonight about China or in your experience in Korea? What do you think it is fundamentally about Philippine culture?
I think what's so wrong is the voters keep on voting in people based on popularity and not based on what they can deliver.
So you think the political system
Yes,
is challenged and not really up to the
Yes.
task of
Because
organizing and
Yeah, we need leaders. We need actual leaders who don't just buy votes, but they could actually have a vision. Where is the country going to, in the next 5 years or 10? And to hire the best people, and not exactly the people who would give them the best kickbacks. I think that's the core of it all.
So in a general sense, you're saying the culture matters,
Yes, the culture matters.
and I think you would agree.
We have to educate voters and to not to have fields isolated in their own, the architectural field. I think we should encourage them to participate more in the political process, in the city planning, so that our cities look more impressive and they would work more efficiently, more productively, and not have, okay, we have a bus stop here, okay, let's just do a jeepney here, and there's no, like, a walkthrough of the city. It's very fragmented, and you don't even know where to go because there's no planning, there's no logic behind it. They just sprout things out.
So what can we learn from that? Your complaints, I think, are probably going to be ratified by many people. Yes.
Okay, I think I'm gonna invite my friend Aaron to either ask a question or offer an answer. Either way, or both.
It's very interesting because it seems like you actually have a strategy that you haven't really pushed or articulated. And it's, in some ways, Frank Lloyd Wright strategy, which is to build with the land, but also to build with the community. So many of your projects from the very beginning of your career have been about breaking things apart. Faced with one building, you do 3 buildings. Faced with a master plan, you do lots of different parts and then have them assemble. Faced with a sprawling village in Jade Valley, you do pinpricks and then have them establish something. So maybe not a grand vision, but aren't you suggesting that doing something that is a small module, maybe like your pizza oven, that builds up into more pieces, might be a good strategy? Aren't you suggesting that we start with small building blocks and build those up
That's the benefit of my friend here. I had not thought about that, but as he was suggesting, I can extend into it. Because as architect, our role is to make things so beautiful, right? You know what? Sometimes even the wrong things, if it's so beautiful, people start to build reasons around it and go with it, other things, but equally beautiful. You see what I mean? So I think our best role, being trained as an architect, is to make every opportunity, even though it's wrongly given to you, but make it so beautiful that people start to use that to give reasons to the others. So if I would, so that would be my take on what Aaron has been. So, the project I showed to you, a large areas. I'm not a mayor. I'm not the biggest bank. What I do is to do those small projects that I can fully embrace and control, and do them to the maximum of my ability to make it so beautiful, so that when the mayor comes, like, I'm going to build the next one just like this, and then the third one even better. So it's happening. That's actually already happening for better purpose. So I guess this may be a message to our students: is whatever given to you small project, do it to the maximum impact.
And I've been informed that we may have to leave it there. Are there any last questions? Yes, ma'am.
No, actually, I have a question, but I wanted to react first. So I think what we wanted to say, yes, we may need better plans, more comprehensive planning for anything. But I also think we need people who enjoy our cities as much as they enjoy traveling. Because sometimes it's just the newness of a different place. I find Seoul very bland, actually. And I mean, there's a blandness to Seoul, and well, maybe the touristy spots, you see the bright lights and all that. But at the end of the day, if you see enough around the world, it's not that much more interesting. Actually, I enjoy the chaos of Manila. It's just a matter of finding the right place.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But anyway, besides that, and you should look at the public housing in Seoul, which is pretty much a stack or a row of stuff. But what I was gonna ask is you've been building the countryside and doing all these explorations there. How does this inform what we build in the city or in the urban context? Since China especially is urbanizing so fast, and I think the context is a bit different in terms of density, in terms of how how they bunch up together.
You gave the answer yourself. No, because you do the small projects and then you build these small little objects. You do the book project and you build it up.
No, it was just thinking. Sorry, thoughts on
Right. There is a kind of a model in any designer's idea. We do complicated projects, huge, but it's always there are modules in your mind. That's how you do huge project. Huge project is actually all made of smaller modules, whether it's a mental module, and that's how we do huge projects actually. Because otherwise, in Chinese we say a little like bird and a huge big dinosaur. They have the equal amount of bones and structure. So you basically have to develop a process that kind of address large project with very simple module and very rich way to multiply and adapt it into a larger context. But I'm just gonna stop there.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, as well, for paying close attention.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. I can come teach to learn. Wow. Thank you. Oh, I have to go like that. Thank you. Thank you so much.